Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to learn about breaking through barriers and creating new perspective. When we look up, it seems that the sky is the limit. But when someone can break through that limit and look back from above, they offer a new perspective, showing the rest of us that we can go even further. Today's guest is leading such a change. I have with me Saray Khumalo from Johannesburg, South Africa. Saray is an award-winning mountaineer, a Guinness World Record holder, author, speaker, coach, and philanthropist. In 2019, after 3 prior attempts, she became the first Black African woman to summit Mount Everest. Saray knows full well that her accomplishment is so much bigger than her, and that it's really about leaving a legacy so that people around the world, and especially Black women, can draw the strength to summit their own mountains. Saray, welcome to the campfire.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and for that amazing introduction.
Yeah, I am so excited. Our mutual friend and previous guest of the show, Danae O'Dowd, episode 101, introduced us, and I'm just so excited for that connection. And I have to tell you that just this part of your story that's just so impactful, it's like a physical moment where so much of this came together, was this actual realization that the sky is not the limit. And I wonder if we could just start our conversation right there, and if you could take us to that moment where you physically saw that the sky was not the limit. Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. I think the most profound, maybe that moment was on the 16th of May 2019 when I summited Everest. I grew up in a family where, you know, a single mother. I always used to say to myself and my sisters, 7 sisters, that the sky is the limit, because she wanted to push us to achieve what she had not achieved or what she had not seen around her. And she also was pushing us because the environment was very paternalistic or patriarchal, I must say, where boys were seen to be the ones that would achieve and girls would be dependents in a way. And she had only 7 girls after trying 6 times and, gave up on trying for a boy. And had to push us that way. And her saying was, the sky is the limit. And for me, that meant I needed to reach that far. But when I got up onto Everest, I realized that she was wrong, because I was above the clouds. And my mission is to actually tell people that come from where I come from, people from all walks of lives, that we have unlimited potential. Just because the sky is what we can see doesn't mean that we can not go further than it. We should use the sky as our stepping stone, as our playground, because we can achieve a lot more in our lifetime.
Can I just ask you about that? Like, I love this. It's such a great metaphor, right? The sky is the limit, but then you get above the clouds. Yeah. On the highest place on earth, and you're looking down at the sky.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was that realization like for you? I was like, you could take us to that moment.
It's humbling, first of all. It doesn't sink in. As you come up, some of the mountains that I've gone on, you see, I don't know if you probably have that in the US as well, eagles that fly way above and you're watching them from above. And at some point you see that, oh, we're almost at the same level. And after a while, you see that they're below you. And then the next thing, you're above the clouds. I think it's humbling. It also changes your perspective on a lot of things. It says what was impossible yesterday is possible today. So what more can I achieve? And I think it doesn't dawn on you immediately. You first sit there. At least for me, I first sat there and I thought, okay, wait a minute, something is not right. There are no clouds above me. It's all just blue and all sea of mountains with lots of almost the colors of the rainbow everywhere. And all the clouds are beneath me. Very humbling. And then the funny thing is, I thought of my mother in that moment, and how wrong she was and how wrong I had been until then, to tell not just my kids, my team at work, that the sky is the limit, meaning let's go for it. Because in English, that says you can achieve more. It stretches you, right? But for me, I literally took it as I need to go above my roof. I need to go to what I can see. Whereas, just because the clouds are there doesn't mean I cannot pierce through them. I cannot break that barrier and go beyond it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so incredibly inspiring. So, as we talk about these limits, I wonder if we could just go back to the beginning and your childhood and sort of where this adventure spirit developed from and this desire to push through these limits.
So I grew up, I was born in Zambia to a Rwandese mother and a Zambian father, but I was raised by my grandparents who were missionaries. And they taught me a sense of social consciousness. I mean, they were always giving back, looking after the community. But within that environment, we had what is called the Pathfinders, a little bit like Scouts, but for my church community. So we did a lot of camping. We played outside. I mean, we didn't have a TV then. And so I was very tomboyish,
Nice.
whereas my friends played with dolls. I was just like, I had a bike. My grandmother was the only Gogo is grandma, that rode a bike, and I had a small bike. So I did all the things that were, I was on trees. There was a small hill. I used to think it was a mountain, but now when I look back, it was probably a more hill behind our house that I always used to go up, and I would watch the roof of the neighbors, and wondered what was out there. So I've always been curious. I was a curious child. I was probably seen as naughty because it wasn't expected from a girl. But I was very adventurous. If we can't do it, but why? What if I did it? What would happen? So just pushing those boundaries at that level. Having said that, climbing, whether it's Kilimanjaro or Mount Everest, was never something that I dreamt of as a teenager, or even knew anybody in my environment that had done so. But I was outdoorsy because the Pathfinders took us camping. We did notes. And they would leave us in the middle of nowhere and leave clues so that we can find our way to the camp. This used to happen 2 weeks every year. And I would hate it when I'm there. I would go home and look forward to it the next year. So I suppose that's where it came from. And also I traveled a lot. So I had family in the DRC, which used to be called Zaire. So during holidays, we traveled, going to relatives, and you see different environments. I guess that also opened my mind to different diversity, I suppose, how different people do things differently, and how to appreciate and learn from everyone else around the continent. At least in the central, southern, and eastern Africa is places that I visited as a young child.
Yeah, I want to just dig into one thing you said, because that's so true. But you said when you were on these 2-week adventures, you hated it when you were there, but when it was over, you couldn't wait to go back.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so during these we used to call them camp meetings.
Yeah.
The leaders were very strict. So we didn't have tents as I know them now. We used to go to camp. They'll find a flat area where we would camp, but we had to use everything around us to create shelter for those 2 weeks. So we cut grass to create little like shelters. We would collect firewood. We would cook for ourselves. So it was like it was strict. We had cooking duties, and we were young.
Yeah.
There was a lot of discipline, memorizing classes and so forth. So after in those 2 weeks, that when you get there, you're all excited and you do stuff, you meet people from all over, but in the second week, you're like, I want to go home, because the food is now, you want food from home. You're tired of this camping food. You're tired of cooking for everybody. But after you go home, you're like, oh, when are we going next? I guess it's the same with expeditions. You're on Everest for 2 weeks. You're like, oh my God, I need food from home. But after you come back, say, when is the next expedition? That hasn't stopped.
Help me connect the dots, though. What is it that you're there, you want to come home, like, what is it that brings you back?
I guess it's the experience. It's the realization that out of my comfort zone is where I grow, but it's also, it fuels me. There's something humbling about having so little, but being able to survive it. Yeah. And there is something about connecting with people that are of the same mindset, where you're not worried about emails and cell phones and everything else that's happening, but just you're self-reflecting. You are actually connecting with nature, and you're realizing how much all this that's in our houses is not as important as we would like to believe. Because if I take it back to Everest, everything I needed for the 2 weeks for the 2 months, I beg your pardon, of the expedition, I carried in my duffel bag and in my backpack. So then what do I need all this other stuff for?
Yeah.
And the people that are minimalistic start making sense in that moment,
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. So as a kid, you and I spoke at length before doing this recording, and one of the things that you shared with me was this sort of childhood connection that you felt with superheroes on the cartoons, and I'd love if you could kind of tell us a little bit about some of that.
Absolutely. So, like I said, when I grew up with my grandparents, we had no TV. At 13, I moved to live with my mother, and she had a TV, a black and white TV. And we used to have cartoons for 1 hour, 5 to 6. I remember I used to run from school because I needed to catch those cartoons. So I don't know if you would relate to this. So we had Superman, She-Ra, Wonder Woman. I mean, they were flying around in those movies. They were saving their worlds, but they didn't look like me. They didn't talk like me. No one around me was flying. So you kind of sort of have a sense of self-disbelief. I was there to just applaud them, admire them, but I can never be them. But education and exposure and traveling makes you realize, in fact, coming to America made me realize that we all the same. There is nothing special about people that are on the other side. I came and visited after watching Coming to America. That's all I wanted to do. I needed to go to America. The first version with Eddie Murphy. I don't know why. Gives away my age.
Love it. Great.
And then when I got there, I realized that no, we're not any different. They're not any cleverer than I am. They were asking me about their friend in Nigeria. I'm like, why would I know your friend from Nigeria? So you actually realize that people are people, and we can all be superheroes. And it's not about having delusion of grandeur to change the whole world. It's about changing your world. And if we can inspire each other as a generation to change our world, as a generation would leave the world a lot better.
Yeah. So, Saray, you go from this young child going on these 2-week expeditions in the summer, to these camps in the summer, watching cartoons with superheroes, through this whole journey of becoming the first Black African woman to summit Mount Everest. How does that happen? Can you take us through that journey?
Absolutely. So I grow up and I get married. I have kids. Stop camping, and it's all about corporate South Africa, which you probably would know. The 9 to 5 like sucks you in, and life really sucks you in. And we all have cars, we have mortgages, and and one evening I'm sitting in the office, pretty good job, and And I get a call that my older sister had passed away. So I'm one of 7 girls, and I'm the second born, and she had passed away suddenly. And I remember I was in the office around 7 o'clock in the evening, which could tell you that I was really a workaholic. And thinking about her, and getting really sad, and crying, and reflecting on whether she had achieved her purpose. And one of the things that came to my mind was my grandfather, who was a pastor, a missionary, and he always used to say, if you don't live a life of service, it's a life wasted. Which is something that we didn't take seriously, because he was always preaching. But in that moment, I reflected on that, and I asked myself, am I living a life of purpose? And the answer was no. And then I went back to my mother, who always used to say, the sky is the limit. Am I reaching for the sky? And the answer once again was no. Yes, I had a car. I had a family. I was successful. Until then, I thought. And that moment made me feel like I wasn't doing the right things that created the impact that I would have wanted to leave. So I quit my job about 4 months after my sister had passed away. Lost a whole lot of shares. So we have all these golden handshakes, and I lost shares. I went to work for the post office, and the reason I did that was because we were going to create a bank that was going to service the previously disadvantaged people that were not part of the economy. And I made a conscious decision after leaving my job then, that every job or every project that I was going to work with or going to join had to be one that's creating an impact in my community, or giving back, making a change that I would like to see. And the journey started there. And I joined that environment for about 11 months. It didn't really work out. And then I found myself in an environment that was creating a bank. We were going to form a bank that was, again, dealing with wealth for the like making people wealthier. Okay. How can we help people create intergenerational wealth? And I joined them. But something that actually shifted everything was climbing Kili. While I was there, we were kind of encouraged to adopt causes. If you love animals, you could go and adopt animals at the SPCA. You help them once a month. You raise money and you go and sponsor, and the business would match it. And we adopted a home that looked after street kids here in Johannesburg. They look after 180 to 200 street kids. So every month you go around the office, around payday, like, come on, guys, contribute, and they give you money. The business adds to it. You take these kids for a hike. You kind of take them to the zoo. You spend time with these street kids, just reminding them that, there is life beyond their circumstance in that moment. But every second month, as you go to ask your colleagues to contribute, people see you, they pretend to be busy on their phones, on their laptops, because there's donor fatigue, which is the reality.
You know what's coming. Yeah.
Exactly. And somebody said, well, they were climbing Kili. I started training for it. This was 2012. And in the process, I said, well, why don't we use Kilimanjaro to raise money for Kids Heaven, for the home? And we did that. Although the climb or the summit was was disastrous, but I summited nonetheless. We raised enough money to build an outdoor gym for the home, worth about 200,000 rands. At the time, that was about 16,000 US dollars. We converted a room into a library for the home. And one of the kids, when we're handing over, came to me, a girl, and said to me, do you really come from the township? Now, township, if you know the history of South Africa, is where Black people used to stay, and the privileged were in the suburbs, so to speak. And I remember laughing, because I thought she was joking. Do Black people swim kind of joke that we always make. And she said, no, she's serious, because people like us don't do things like this. It's the American or European kids that come as exchange students to the home. When they leave, they're the ones that do these things. Mm-hmm. It just dawned on me that she had the same sense of self-disbelief that I grew up watching those cartoons, right? And as I left there, as a mother of 2 boys, I wondered if I was doing enough to show my kids that help comes from within before they looked elsewhere. There is no superhero. We are the heroes, and we needed to be intentional about it. So I made a commitment that I will, despite the fact that Kili was difficult at the time, I was going to climb the 7 highest peaks on the 7 continents around the world, but use it to raise money for education, because education is what stopped me from having this sense of self-disbelief, to somebody that believed that I can be the superhero in my own story. I can be a superhero in my environment. And if I can contribute to another African child's education, I can create many superheroes and change the narrative for the next generation.
You are an enormous thinker. It's so incredible. I think just for listeners, for myself, like Kilimanjaro was sort of this first step, and then combining that with the philanthropy piece that you're talking about right now, obviously that was like they kind of fueled each other.
Yes.
From an adventure standpoint, like what was your previous, outside of the 2 weeks of going to camp, like was there a progression to like making the decision to be able to, I mean, climbing Kilimanjaro is no joke. It's a big excursion.
Yeah, it is. So before climbing Kili, when I made a decision that I will, we trained for about 12 months. So I started hiking a lot around South Africa. I did a lot of the Drakensberg. That's a mountain range in our side, in our country. I hiked around Lesotho, which is a neighboring country, very mountainous as well. But other than that, I then started gymming a lot more. I just became a lot more conscious about what I'm eating, the training, and a lot more intentional in terms of Kili. But I made a lot of mistakes while tracking up Kili. I don't know if you've done Kili before. They talk about pole pole. If you go to Nepal, they say bistare bistare. I ran up the mountain every day because
no good. I
not
learned
at all. So the summit push was difficult because I had terrible altitude sickness. I ran up because it was raining and I didn't want to get wet. And I thought it was cool to get to camp the same time as porters. Bad mistake. But, luckily I did manage to summit and learned a whole bunch about high altitude and how it can humble you.
Yeah. So take us through the progression to the summit of Everest.
Yeah, so I come back from Kili. We do this thing for Kids Heaven, and I make a commitment to do the 7 summits. And I went to Everest in 2014 for the first time. But before doing that, I obviously did my research, met the first Black man to summit Everest, and I was like, so how do we do this? And he advised me to actually go and train in the French Alps, Chamonix, and I went. Yeah. I had never used crampons. Yeah. I started rock climbing. I did all sorts, and I started training a lot more, and one of the things that I remember him saying, which I hold true to today, is that not every mountain is the same. You don't train for Kilimanjaro and try and summit Everest, right? You train for Everest in a specific way. You need to be kind of intentional in that respect, which is a context that I did not have until then. So 2014, I decided to go to Everest. I, in fact, went with him. Very with romantic ideas about what Everest is really in my head, until I got there and I realized that the world, the climbing community didn't really think women belonged there necessarily. People would come into a base camp, into the tent, and say, aren't you a mother? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a mother of 2, but there's a father of 6 there. Why aren't you questioning why? Yeah, right. And more so than I'm Black. And, I got questions like, are you sure you're not going to Everest Base Camp? So I realized that that community at the time didn't think that women were really equipped for Everest, at least, and more so a Black woman. So maybe I belong to Everest. And also I was the least experienced in the group. So maybe in their defense, that would have been the reason why they thought I didn't belong. I made a few mistakes. I decided that to show them and prove to them that I belonged, I was going to run faster, hike faster than everyone from Lukla up to Everest Base Camp. Lukla is the little airport where you land, the gateway to Everest. And I crashed when I got to Everest Base Camp because I was too tired. I also got altitude sickness. We were doing like a rotation to Pumuri, which is just 200 meters above Everest Base Camp. I was 2.5 hours late than everybody else. I was puking, and yet I got to Everest Base Camp very strong. And one of the lessons that I picked from there is, you can't be complacent. And don't pace yourself for Everest Base Camp when your destination is the top of the world. If my destination was Everest Base Camp, that strategy would have worked. But, but anyway, 2014, unfortunately, 16 Sherpas died. I'm sure if you follow Everest, you know the story. A big Sirac fell on the 18th of April, 2014. I remember it was very early in the morning. I was in my tent. There was like an avalanche. I woke up and I went back to sleep because we were told Everest Base Camp is strategically positioned. Avalanches would never really come to that space, well, until they did. But and then walkie-talkies, the Sherpas were talking amongst themselves, but in their language, we didn't understand. But they needed a paramedic. And when they shouted looking for a paramedic in English, we all realized that there was something big happening. So we all got out of our tents. I started watching and I was taking pictures and videos of what was happening. A helicopter was hovering around Khumbu Icefall where the accident happened and pulling lifeless bodies and bringing them onto Everest Base Camp. I took my camera and I went into the dining tent and said, but this doesn't look like the people are alive. And I realized experienced climbers that made me feel like I didn't belong. Were just as scared as I was. One of them, in fact, packed up and left Everest Base Camp. He's like, send my duffel bag. That's how scared he was. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I had survivor's guilt. Did the Sherpas that die really want to be there, or did they die because I wanted to climb? I and other people wanted to climb. And a friend sent me a message to say, figure out why you have been saved. And that will inform how best you need to move forward. Because the reality is we are born, we are all going to die at some point. The question is, how have we lived? What are we doing with the moments? The moments that we are capable of doing something, capable of making history. So I left Everest that year and trained differently. I noticed that I did a lot more gym work. People that were cyclists and runners were a lot more strong at high altitude. So I improved my cardio. I climbed a few more mountains. I climbed Labushe East. I climbed Mount Mira in Nepal just to get a lot more experience. And I left. One of the things that I started doing after that year, Scott, is to use every setback, every curveball as a point of growth. As what am I supposed to learn from this? If I can still breathe, I can still climb, then it's not my time. But when my time comes, I want to be ready. So and when I come back, I'm not going to come back from zero. I'm going to come back from a step forward. And that I did by writing down what I had learned from that expedition and what went wrong. What went wrong was less than half a page. What I learned from this experience was more than 2 pages. And that's what I focused on. And I didn't realize it then, but it's become part of what I do because setbacks are part of life. And if we let them paralyze us, we'll never change anything and we'll never grow. But it's an opportunity to let them make us stronger and better because they're not happening to us, they're happening for us. Yeah. So anyway, the mountain was closed. I came back home 2014.
Can I touch on one thing that you said real quick? You said someone said to you after the accident where the 16 Sherpas were killed,
Yeah.
figure out why you were saved.
Yeah.
And I wonder what was your like immediate reflection from that?
So before they sent me that, I was crying and scared and worried that, the shepherds died because I wanted to climb. Is it really worth it? Maybe the people that believe that I shouldn't be here were right. And so when the person said that, it got me thinking about, actually, it was an aha moment because they were right. I think people die because it's their time, because their purpose has been fulfilled. So mine wasn't. And my homework after this message was, why was I saved? And how can I be a lot more intentional to achieve my purpose?
Wow.
Right. So,
Yeah,
I think death, even subsequent to that, even now, makes me reflect on where I'm at in terms of my purpose, what I'm doing with my life, because tomorrow is not guaranteed, effectively.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for that. So now we're back and we're ready for the second attempt.
Yeah. So we're back, and I started training again. 2015, I could still go back. I went back in 2015. As you probably know, there was an earthquake. There's a few movies that have been done on it. I was between Camp 1 and 2, during the 2015 earthquake. We were, the biggest lesson. There are many lessons, but the biggest lesson for me in 2015 was a lesson on leadership, how we show up as leaders when the world is shaking around us, when the ground is unstable, when what we believed to be true, what we were optimistic about, is shaken. How do we show up? So, and how this manifested, at least for this expedition, is Nawang and I. So Nawang was my shepherd during that year, climbing towards Camp 2. And the idea was we go to Camp 2 and come back and sleep at Camp 1, which is a rotation. And we needed to touch Camp 2, I beg your pardon, by 2:00 in the afternoon. And so him and I are moving. 3 of the other climbers have gone up front, and 6 of us are coming behind. So Nawang says, if we have to make it, the 2 of us need to actually branch off and leave the other 5. So the 2 of us are moving when suddenly the glacier beneath us started shaking. So we were not rocked to each other. He was moving in front and I'm just following him. And when the glacier started shaking, he turns around, hooks his carabiner onto my harness, and he says, Sarah, we are jumping. So the idea was, if the ground opened, if the crevasse opened underneath us, we needed to jump to the same side, because if we jumped on opposite side, which is crazy. I mean, if you know about it. But he had 22 years experience. I was still novice.
Yeah.
I just sat there and I watched him like a hog. If he was moving to the left, I'm going to the left. And it felt like 5 minutes, this earthquake, but I believe it was just less than 2 minutes. And it stopped. When it stopped, he unhooks, he checks, he says, are you okay? I'm okay. He says, okay, we are all right. When suddenly we heard this rumbling. So Lhotse, Numtse, and Everest all started avalanching. I don't know if you remember that the earthquake was of 8.3 magnitude. And they all started avalanching. We heard it before we saw the snow, the rocks coming towards us. When Nawang immediately, now I'm waiting for instructions. What are we doing now? He just started praying. Om Mani Padme Hum. This is a Tibetan prayer that I had memorized during the puja ceremony. And I remember watching him and recognizing that he's praying to this Tibetan God that I don't know. I'm a Christian. So I'm like looking at him and I'm thinking, the Tibetan God is coming for him, not me. So I was like, I'm a Christian, Jesus, what's up? And it sounds like a funny story, but it's really about how we show up when the ground is shaking around us. When he said, let's jump, I was with him and I was going to jump with him. Whether it was going to be a mistake, we're going to make a plan, together. But when he was praying to what I didn't understand, I was like, Jesus, let's go to the left. If you are saying Tibetan God, let's go to the right, I wasn't interested. I was making my own plan. And I always say to leaders, when the company is in trouble, when the community is in trouble, when the family is in trouble, how do you show up? Is there a clear strategy in terms of where you are leading everybody else? Or are you not communicating clearly? Because when you communicated clearly, and knowing what I know today, we probably would have both died if a crevasse had opened up, really. But I was going to go with him because he showed leadership. But when he showed fear and was praying, and I didn't understand that strategy, he was going left, I was going right. It just didn't work. And that was a big lesson for me. Anyway, so I was rescued along with other people. I think the most famous American in the mountaineering world that was there was Alan Annette. I don't know if you know of Alan Annette, and others were all airlifted to Everest Base Camp. That's when we realized how devastating the earthquake was. We were stuck at Camp 2 for 2 days. And then when we got to Everest Base Camp, the mountain was closed. Coming down the Khumbu Valley was devastating. Tea houses that we had stayed in were on the ground.
Wow.
People were afraid to stay because of aftershocks. They were afraid to stay in their houses. They were camping, in the yard. It was just, you then realize how you were saved. You are lucky. There must be a reason. Why you? Why not them that lost their lives during this earthquake? Anyway, so I came back home 2015. 2016, I couldn't afford it. I always say I blame my boss, not enough bonus. and one thing that I need to highlight is throughout this process, I wrote many letters asking for sponsorship, probably over 200, asking for sponsorship. And we got a lot of silence. What makes you think you can make it? One actually was bold enough to say, who's the man taking you?
Wow.
Which was interesting. But all that added to my resolve to not just make a difference in terms of education, change my world in terms of education, but it showed me the importance and the value of representation. And that became climbing for me. It's become bigger than just me going up there to take a selfie. It's about making a difference. It's about, Everest was about representation for the most part, because I couldn't understand why I wasn't given the same benefit of the doubt that a white rich male would be given on the mountain, because they wouldn't question him as much as they questioned me. And it was very clear for me that I wonder if they would want to be rocked with me beyond Everest Base Camp, And I'm hoping, I know that I attempted 4 times before I finally summited, but I believe, very strongly that those that look like me in future will be given the benefit of the doubt, because I tried so many times, because I managed eventually to summit Everest. But anyway, let's go back.
I have to imagine, though, that part of that resistance that you felt from people was fuel for you to keep going.
Absolutely. And the stubbornness in me was like, I will show them. And at that time, I didn't doubt myself one bit, except for 2017, when I was left for dead in the death zone. Then I woke up frostbitten, confused. I had gone 99 meters from the top. We went all the way up to the south summit. So close and yet so far. And when I woke up, I just realized that, I gave up inside. I questioned whether the people that thought I couldn't and I didn't belong on the mountain were right. And I think that's the lowest point, when you start almost thinking your naysayers were right. When you start joining their camp, then there's no one rooting for you, not even yourself.
Sarah,
that was the lowest point.
Can I backtrack you for a minute? Because this piece is so big. You said you lost consciousness in the death zone. For listeners, can you take us to that period in time and those moments, and kind of give us some background on what happened there?
Absolutely. So we talked about 2015, 2016. I didn't attempt Everest, but I had a huge accident, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I eventually went to Everest in 2017 to attempt. Maybe let me go a little bit back. I hope you don't mind this.
Yeah.
So 2015, I come back from Everest. I still start writing the letters, but I'm training. And I go back in 2017. But before 2017, 2016, I was running, cycling, because these are things that I saw working for people that were avid climbers, that were having a better time in the mountain than I did. And on the 8th of August 2016, I fell off my mountain bike. So I was doing a stage race where you kind of cycle for multiple days, 3 to 4 days, sometimes 5 days. So we raced on the first day. And on the second day, I'm coming down the mountain. And I remember just looking and thinking, this is very technical, but okay, I had done lessons, let me figure it out. And I go down, maybe moving at 42 kilometers an hour down the mountain. As I got down trying to brake, I realized that I had lost my back brakes. So I hit a rock at the bottom, flung up off the uncleated and off the bike, and I fell on a rock. My head cracked quite badly, and
Wow.
I don't remember much except that I woke up almost 3 weeks later from a coma in Milpark, one of the hospitals. So
Yeah.
I was told that I was airlifted. There was blood everywhere, and so forth. And when I woke up, I didn't even think of Everest. I was just like, the doctors were like, you can't afford to have another concussion, because we may not be able to put the head together again. I mean, it cracked my head. My eye almost came out. It was a crazy accident. So I got out of hospital. I started walking. So I didn't get back on the bike because I was afraid of falling again. I started walking in September. In October, I started running, but the furthest I ran was about 16 kilometers. In November, there was a Soweto Marathon, which is one of our big events. And I went there thinking I had a ticket, but maybe I should do half a marathon. But I ended up doing the full marathon because the guys doing the full marathon were singing. I mean, there's a vibe at the marathon, at the start. I'm like, let me do this. Even if I end up doing 30 kilometers, that's okay. And I joined them. And I finished that marathon. It was a Sunday. On Monday, I've got a picture of me jumping after finishing that marathon. On Monday, I was at Milpark at my doctor's, and I'm like, I did a marathon. Surely I can still climb. It's the first time I entertained that I could go back to Everest. And then the doctor, I think, just thought, he's not going to stop me. He's like, 3 weeks before you leave, you must come and see me. And I went back to Everest 2017. 2017 got all the way up to the South Summit. One of the things that, when I reflect back on, that was a big lesson for 2017 for me, is that we put so much emphasis on what the world sees as success for us, more than what we see as success for ourselves. We can never, what you see as success, I can't try and achieve everyone's interpretation of success for me. I need to find my own victories and claim them because they're my personal best and celebrate them despite what everybody else thinks. So in 2017, I got my personal best. Some of the things, if I go back, so 2014, I didn't achieve Everest, but I went back and did Mount Everest. I came back 2015. I didn't achieve Everest because of the earthquake. I went back and did Aconcagua in South America. Came back to Everest 2017. South Summit is 99 meters from the top. We got to Camp 4. There was 3 of us in our tent, myself and 2 Indian climbers, a male and a female. In the middle of the night, around 10 o'clock, our Sherpas are like, let's go go up. Before they said, let's go up, they were arguing amongst themselves, which we later learned is because they were saying, the winds have just increased, the weather window is not good, we shouldn't go out. But they were speaking amongst each other, not to us in their language. So we didn't know what they were talking about. And they said, let's go. Around 11, we all start going. The two Indians are in front of me. At some point, I pass them. We go all the way. When we get to the South Summit, so we sit, and Nawang changes my oxygen tank. And then he moves in front, and I realize that he is struggling as much as I am. You know, in the death zone, so the death zone is the zone between Camp 4, which is about 7,900, 8,000, and the summit.
Yeah.
And this is where you sign the fine print, these indemnity forms to say if anything happens to you in the death zone, they're not necessarily obligated to come and rescue you because it may cost them their lives.
Yeah.
And so this is where really, Scott, every step you take feels like a half a marathon, you know. But also it's one of those places where in 2017, I had such a beautiful experience. You know, the stars seems just brighter than I had ever seen them. The moon you feel like you're walking the galaxy at some point, like you can just go and pick one of the stars. It's wow, it was beautiful for me. And unfortunately, when we got to the South Summit, the weather was really bad. And I realized that, you know, Nawang was struggling as much as I was. So me struggling, that was my personal best. I had never been above 8,000, right? But him struggling made me ask him, like, what the hell? And then I also realized all the other climbers that were coming behind me had gone back. So it was just him and I, and everybody else wasn't behind us. And so I said to him, he said, no, the weather window is bad. And you're really moving on a ridge now. And you also need to bear in mind that the summit is halfway. You need to go back down, alive.
Right.
I said to him, I had additional oxygen. I always bought extra oxygen in case. I said, I think maybe we go back to Camp 4 and wait for the weather to subside and then come back because I have additional oxygen. And that was always the plan. And he says, okay. And we're going down, but I'm not feeling any better. I'm feeling weak. I'm feeling dizzy. And I said to him, something is wrong. What he and I both didn't realize is the tube for my oxygen something wasn't working. So I was inhaling and exhaling the same air in the mask for probably 5 to 6 hours.
Wow.
And so when I said, I'm not feeling well, something is wrong, he says to me, no, look, there's the camp. And I look, yellow tents, camp is near. Okay, let's keep going. But I lost consciousness. Now, he wasn't in a state to help me. He left me there. A lot of this is now hearsay because I was unconscious. And he went to Camp 4, got other Sherpas. They came to pick me up. They carried me to Camp 4. When we got there, our tent had been blown off by the wind because the winds were so bad. They said at some point it was even above 50 to 60 kilometers an hour. Mm-hmm. So the tent being blown off meant sleeping bags, everything I left in the tent was gone, not just for me and the other two climbers that were with me. So them thinking probably I'm dead, I think, because he changed my oxygen tank, but they took a makeshift, one of these broken tents that you find that people leave at Camp 4, and he just placed me there. And he went to sleep with the other Sherpas in a tent next to me. Now, in the night, I'm going in and out of consciousness. I obviously am not unaware of my environment in any case. The next day, I feel people pulling me. So I wake up and I recognize one of the Sherpas. I'm like, Lakpa, you know. And he looks at me, like in shock. He says, you're alive. And I'm thinking, of course I'm alive, but I'm hungry, right? And he says to me, I have no food, but I have water. And I took the water and I looked at the stretcher and I said to him, I'm not going to sit on that stretcher. I'm going to walk down. And I looked at Everest, so close and yet so far. And for me, that is the point where I too, like my naysayers, wondered if I belonged on the mountain. If I was just stubbornly following this dream, and I wasn't meant to be there. Yeah. So it was the lowest point, like I said.
Yeah. So that was number 3.
Yeah, that was number
That was a
3.
big one.
I came home, stopped writing sponsorship letters. I mean, if they didn't sponsor me when I was fine, why would they sponsor me now? But one thing, I continued training. I mean, at some point it becomes part of your life. And in 2018, my younger son, he was 15 at the time, found me sitting watching TV, and he said to me, "Mom, when are you going back to Everest?" I probably looked bored in his defense. And I remember looking at him and thinking, I can't tell him I've given up. So I said to him, 2020, just like get rid of him, because I always say to him when he loses a soccer match, figure out what you need to learn from that, go back,
Yeah.
try to
Nice.
change something. So how can I then say to him, that would be hypocrisy. So
Yeah, you got to take your own medicine.
exactly, and then in 2019, something happened. I don't know if I mentioned to you that until 2013, I didn't know no Black African woman had summited Everest. I thought we had done it. Why not? And a guy that I used to work with, Luazingwenya, came to me and said, "We're going to Everest. Don't you want to come with us?" I said, no. I'll do Everest last. So my idea at the time was I'll do them according to height until I go to the... And he said to me, "But no Black African woman had done." I said, "No, man, they have done it." And we Googled and discovered that, they hadn't. So going to France for training, I went with him. And he always believed that I would be the first one. So every time we would summit small and insignificant mountain, he would go, "You'll be the first one." And 3 weeks before I went to Everest in 2019, I received a call that he had died.
Mm.
Like all the other deaths, it just got me reflecting. Why do I want to do this in 2020? Why not 2019? I'm trained. I've got an opportunity, but I didn't have enough money. I was short of 18,000 rand to go and climb. And the sponsor came up and said, "Well, they'll sponsor me the 18. That's cool if I want to go." I used, I think I mentioned to you that I used my credit card. I normally don't pay using my credit card. I maxed it. I was just going to go. And I was going to do it for me, but I was going to do it for Loazi as well. Because tomorrow, the idea that tomorrow is another day is a myth, because what makes you believe that tomorrow is going to come for you specifically? So I decided 2019 to go back, but a few things that I did differently. I interviewed the leader that I was going to go with. I made sure they were an internationally accredited mountain guide. He had summited he was from Ireland. He had summited Everest 8 times. And it was a small group. I also bought my own weather report. I wasn't going to get out of the tent because somebody said, let's go. And I also did something different in terms of approach. I wasn't anxious about the summit. I was excited about getting to Camp 1, getting to Camp 2, and so forth. But before we get there, I land in Kathmandu. Now I've paid my basic, short of 18,000. And the company that was taking us called me and said, "Listen, you haven't paid everything." I'm like, no. I mean, these guys said they'll sponsor. I'm sure they've paid. Let me double check. I called them. They're like, "Oh, can we pay in installment?" I'm like, "But who climbs Everest in installment? Like, come on." And I had no choice, because now I don't have a credit card or money to pay these people. I have to go and say, "Can I pay in installment?" The guy looks at me and says, "Okay." So they pay $9,000.
Wow.
I go to Everest. We do the rotation. Now we're waiting for the summit push. I'm called again aside and say, "Listen, you are 9,000 rand short. You can't go up for the summit push until that money is paid." And I call them. I'm like, "Guys," and the guy's like, no, I'm very sorry. And they pay the remaining amount. Wow. For me, it's just a testament of the fact that it was the right time.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. If not God, who? I mean, how does this happen? But anyway, so yeah, I go up, get to Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3. There were 4 of us, and on the 16th of May, someone like me was able to step on top of the world. Very humbling experience. I think the first thing, how guides and shepherds tell you, it's just there, and they kept doing that. So when I got to the top, I didn't believe that I was on top. I went all the way up to the edge. I'm like, okay, shit, yeah, they're right. And I sat down, and I just crying. And the reflection about my mother and the sky is the limit became real in that moment. Because when I looked around, I realized that, the sky was beneath us, and nothing was between us and whatever galaxy. It was just blue and going into nowhere, really. And the realization that people didn't shut doors in my face. They closed little windows and left the gate opened, and I walked right through it because it was the right time. What a humbling experience.
Humbling and amazing. Just amazing. And we started this with talking about how the sky is the limit. That was your perspective. That's what you were taught when you were younger. Like, I'm just curious, like, for you, like, I know this is so much bigger than you, but just for you, was it been like to have that perspective change?
Um, I'm a lot more daring. I'm also patient with myself. I don't beat myself. I don't spend so much time crying about what hasn't worked.
Mm.
I spend a lot of time appreciating the opportunity that the moments happened because they happened for me. I also don't believe there's anything that is important for me, aligned to my values, that I cannot do. That's why I love this a lady, I don't know if you know, Marianne Williamson, that
Yeah.
says, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. It is that we are powerful beyond measure. I live that, I believe that, and I own it. I believe that we are all uniquely extraordinary, and being ordinary is a choice. It's when we try and meet other people's definition of success for us that we remain ordinary. When we try and be like other people, that we remain ordinary. But when we stick to our purpose and our time and keep moving forward, we are uniquely extraordinary, capable of making history in our lifetime.
So, Sada, what do you think about Superman and Wonder Woman and She-Ra now?
I think we are all superheroes. We are superheroes in our own lives. We must focus on our purpose. So if you indulge me, I believe, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, that says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord, and it's plans to prosper you." So why do you doubt? When it doesn't work, it's happening for you. Figure out why, learn from it, and start with that step, because you are the superhero. There's no mistake about you, and your journey and mine are totally different. I can support you to achieve your greatness, and you can support me. And that's the other thing that Everest taught me, the power and strength of collaboration. Nobody gets to the top alone. Nobody. That shepherd that cooked for me at Everest Base Camp, even though they didn't step any step further than base camp, were part of my success story. I couldn't have done it without them. So appreciate the people around you, but at the same time, be very vigilant about who you surround yourself with, because not everybody is aiming for the summit. Some people are just going to Everest Base Camp, and that's their summit, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean that you should let them drag you down with them. If you need to go further up, surround yourself with the right people that will help you get there, and be the right person for them too. And that's the power of collaboration. as an overachiever, I didn't always believe that. I was like, I can do this on my own, yeah, but I was humbled.
Sarah, there's so much. We could do 3 more we could do a lot more podcast episodes. There's, you are the first Black African woman to have summited Everest, but you're also working towards the Explorers Grand Slam, which is probably a whole nother episode in itself. There are things that you are doing for women to take people on treks, and the philanthropy. There's so much more. There are opportunities outside of the hour-long conversation that we're having today for people to learn more about you. And I just want to give you a minute because you've written a book, My Journey to the Top of the World. Would love for you to tell us a little bit about that.
So My Journey to the Top of the World is a memoir. You can find it on Amazon. It's really about my life. I think it's about saying that we are all uniquely extraordinary, and the lessons that I've been able to learn along the way. But if you don't mind, I would like to just read the last paragraph because it will tell you exactly what I'm trying to achieve with the book as I tell my story. I end it with the lessons that I've learned, but also with a message to say good luck. Every one of us has his or her own personal mountain to climb. It might not be Everest, and it might not be a physical mountain. Yours might be in the boardroom, on a bicycle, in your family, at school, or even in the health of your own body. The reality is there's always something that we need to achieve, something big and difficult and meaningful. Whatever it is, continue to believe in your limitless potential because the summit is possible if you keep stepping. I believe that we are all extraordinary and have the capacity to do extraordinary things in our lifetime. Whatever your personal Everest, I wish you strength, purpose, kind weather, and some luck, but more importantly, God's blessings. When you get there, remember to be thankful, reach down and pull someone else up with you. Sarah.
I love that so much. Thank you so much. It's a great way to end the book. And as we kind of wrap up here, but this whole idea of reaching down and pulling others up, there's opportunity for people to be able to do that. How can people work with you or trek with you if they want to?
Well, so I'm taking especially women, but men as well, up Kilimanjaro. I help them with the training, the preparation. I've just recently helped a group of women guides on Kilimanjaro start their own company. That's a whole other story. And then I'm getting women from all over the world, the US, South Africa, Namibia, and other parts to go on to the mountain. You can join by coming to Summits with a Purpose, www.summitswithapurpose.org. That's the NGO. So part of the proceeds I'm using to build libraries because I realize that I won't climb forever. But if I can encourage other people to help me do this, and we can build more and more libraries. Or you can come onto my website. It's my name, www.saraykhumalo.com, and we'll do so. Not just climbing. I'm also I'm a motivational speaker. I speak to corporates. I've done a talk at the UN. I'm also an executive coach. So I'm trying as much as possible to use my experience, my story, to inspire this generation to do better, to do more, and make sure that we change the narrative for the next generation.
Sarah, you are a change leader and a huge inspiration. Your accomplishments are amazing, but what you're doing for the world to help change perspective, it's incredible. You are a superhero. And here's the thing about superheroes. Hollywood loves to make movies about superheroes. And when they get a hold of your story, they're going to want to make a movie about your life. And when they do, I want to know who the Hollywood actress is going to be that's going to play you in your movie.
Without a doubt, Lupita.
Yeah! That's so awesome. Okay, what's your movie going to be called?
Well, African Summit of Dreams.
Ooh, Africa Summit of Dreams starring Lupita. Yes. Amazing. So Absolutely. Good. This was such a fun conversation. I really appreciate the time that you spent with me today. For those listening, I hope you've been inspired as much as I have. I hope that Sada's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun. It didn't feel like we were recording. It was like I'm just chatting to a friend. So I appreciate you for making me comfortable.
Thank you, friend.